Amy, thanks for being with us today. We have tons of great questions for you. And just a reminder to everybody, feel free at any time to post your questions in the chat box. You can send them to me, you can send them to the group, but we certainly want to hear from you folks as well. So in the meantime, we did have some folks that wrote in. Shall we get started, Amy?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. So our first one comes from Fletcher, and Fletcher asks, most of our product marketing teams have taken your courses, but we still struggle writing good problem statements. Can you give us some tips for writing solid problem statements? And he says, note, we are a B2C software company.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest thing when you're writing problem statements is obviously to highlight the problem, but I would say it's a really, really good best practice and a good idea to induce empathy in that problem statement. So one of the techniques that I teach in order to do so is to put in a consequence. What happens if you don't solve those problems? What does that result in? That way it sounds like really icky, and we can do a really good job of proving to the market, whomever's seeing this messaging, that we understand their world. We get it. They don't ever have to question if we understand their problems. So in class, for those of you who've gone through the foundations or the focus class, we do a technology case study where we talk about two particular personas. So as an example, what problems does the sales rep have? Well, they're buried or inundated in administrative tasks. They're constantly missing appointments. They're spending their time on non-sales related activities. So when you're writing that problem statement, it's okay to outline all of those smaller issues, those pain points, but then I would encourage you to do a good job of tying that up. Like, what is that main root umbrella issue that is caused because of those smaller related problems? And then induce that empathy, pull in that consequence. If we don't solve the problem of a sales rep missing appointments and being inundated in administrative tasks, what does that result in? Well, it results in a lack of sales or our inability to meet our quotas, right? So I guess that's probably the biggest thing that I would say is articulate those problems, but pull it together. What's that main thing in terms of the consequence, and really build that empathy. Hopefully that helps.
Fantastic. Yeah, Fletcher, that's some good takeaway there. Paul Young, we have instructor Paul Young with us as well. Paul, this is actually a pricing question that you touched on yesterday for the PDD conference. So maybe you'll have some insights as well. This one comes from Meg Stiles. Meg says, when it comes to pricing, I know that Pragmatic refers to the will I versus which one decision-making process. Can you talk a little bit more in depth and maybe give some additional examples of each?
Of will I and which one? Sure. So this is a concept that, as far as I know, Pragmatic is one of the only people that teaches this concept. The idea that your buyer makes a decision, and that decision can be categorized into this will I versus which one, category. Sometimes they only make one, sometimes they make both, but here's the basic idea. In a will I decision, the buyer is making a decision that says, do I want a product of this type at all? So, do I want to buy a new car at all? Do I want to buy a new, dress for the party this weekend at all? And if the answer is yes, you might go on to the second part, which is a which one. And then the which one says, all right, once I've made my will I, which one of many different choices do I want to choose from? Do I want, to get that Toyota, or do I want a Cadillac? I'm going to trade off. Do I want, the fancy, cocktail dress, or do I want the LBD? I don't know. I got to make some choices here. So which one can be categorized by, if they're considered alternatives, they're making a which one decision. If they did not consider alternatives, it was a will I decision. And the really interesting thing about these two decisions, sometimes if you're smart, you can capture them during the will I phase and prevent them from getting to which one. Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about doing that is if you can capture them during the will I decision, they are less price sensitive during a will I decision. And so you can actually get them to pay more. And so here's a couple examples of that. let's say you're on the airplane and you're flying across the country, and you were on your text chat messenger with somebody else, and you're in the middle of this like great conversation. All of a sudden you get on the airplane and you take off, and like you lose all connectivity, right? But you can get on Wi-Fi. Now, when your choice to get on Wi-Fi is a will-I decision. You don't have any alternatives, right? It's not like you have like 3 different Wi-Fi providers on the airplane that you could choose from, where you can trade off, speed and price and so on. It's, do I want to get on Wi-Fi and consider that and continue that conversation with somebody that I care about, or not? That's a will I only. There's no which one. And so that, for that reason, you'll notice that Wi-Fi and airplane, pretty expensive. Also, add-on products are good examples of will I. When you buy that car at the dealership, you're probably making a will I in which one for the car itself. Do I want the Toyota or the Cadillac? Okay, I'm going to make my which one. I choose the Cadillac. But then as you are wrapping up with the finance person, they say, hey, you want that extended warranty, don't you? Well, that's a will I, because most people don't cross shop things like add-on products, like, the undercoating, so it doesn't get, damaged by salt, or the warranty, or the whatever. And so add-on products like accessories, cables, extended warranties, things like that, they're oftentimes will I decisions, which is why they're a little bit more pricey.
Yep.
So hopefully that's helpful. Will I versus which one?
Cameo from Mr. Paul Young. That's great. And then Amy, did you have any other, Meg asked for some other, examples of sort of the will I, which one? I think Paul gave us some great ones, but did you have any others to maybe add?
I mean, so very similar to what Paul said. If you've got a piece of hardware and you sell that hardware, and then you also offer software to support that hardware, but the hardware can only operate with that software, there's no other competitive alternatives that you can use, that software would be considered a will I. So, I mean, Paul said it exactly right. The thing you need to think about is, at the time of the buyer's decision, did they consider any competitive alternatives? And if the answer is no, it's a will I. If they did, then it's a which one.
Mm-hmm. Great. So this next one's a little lengthy. It comes from Milton. Let's see here. It says, I recently got a restaurant tech PMM job during this pandemic and want to do all that I can to succeed. I feel like I'm constantly left in the dark when going to others for info and insights needed to do my job. My boss tells me I can always reach out to him if others aren't getting me what I need, but he has also mentioned he sometimes has to babysit me, and then he says, my words, not his, on projects. Any advice on how to motivate others to want to help me, or other reference points that I can use to get what I need when colleagues just aren't cutting it?
Ooh, that's a tough one, an interesting one. Paul and I, believe it or not, have actually discussed this in the past, because we believe that there is this soft skill that is needed and required for product managers. It's actually very, very similar to project management, those of you who have been in that realm. So it's this idea of figuring out how can we manage through influence versus authority. I don't have any magic, silver bullets in terms of how to do that. Somebody usually is really good at that, or they're not, or they kind of acquire that skill set through their professional maturity as they continue in their career. But what I always did, and Paul, feel free to add to this, is it was really important for me to figure out what's in it for them. Like, why should they help me? Why should they do what I'm asking them to do? And so without making this sound terrible, I really tried to figure out, how could I position it in a way that it was about them, right? So if I'm asking marketing for collateral, if I'm asking operations to get on the horn and get the job aid done so that we can get the contact center trained, so we can get this new feature out there and they can support it properly, what I need to spin it to them so that they understand the value they would be getting from it. So there's all this socializing and sort of psychology that goes into getting people to do what you need them to do. Paul, would you add anything to that?
I think you're definitely on the right track. So the title is product manager, not product dictator, right? So you can't go to people and say, do it because, I said do it. It's not that kind of role.
Usually not in charge, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it's an influence role, but here's the dirty secret. Another word for influence is manipulation. And so, we're trying to manipulate people to do and act the way that we want them to act without being able to dictate to them. And so I think maybe something that would provide some help here. I just want to give a shout out to this guy named Art Petty. Pragmatic, a couple of months ago, we introduced this new concept that's in our portfolio called PLN, which is the Pragmatic Learning Network, which you can think of like the pragmatic classes that we teach, Amy and I. They're covering the framework that you can see behind Amy on the wall there. And there's a lot of hard skills that go into that, pricing and so on. But the soft skill stuff, Art Petty has introduced a series of classes that are sort of adjunct to the things that we teach that are exactly about this topic. How do you influence? How do you work within groups? How do you get them to act the way that you want them to act, and so on? So that might be a good starting point. And he's also published a ton of stuff to go read on his website and through some of our content channels as well. So if you just go Google Art Petty, you can find out all about it, and maybe the team can post some links as well. But I'd recommend that.
One more thing I just thought of as Paul was talking, just to elaborate a tiny bit more on that. One thing that I was really, really good at, that I was very, very conscious about in my career, was this concept of building champions. So I would go around to senior stakeholders and get them on board with whatever it is we were trying to do, even if it was just a release, right? We've got this massive release coming out at the end of the month or end of Q2, whatever it is. And hey, it's going to require some work from your team. And I need your support. And by building champions in those various functional areas across the stakeholders, those people can help you get the people to do what you need them to do as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think that's a great.
I'm sorry, one other technique that Amy, you reminded me of. So I had a boss one time who said like the one thing that made me effective in my role of leading product teams was that I could take a bullet better than anybody else. And so like I would get up in cross-functional meetings whenever like operations screwed up and they didn't cover an issue or we lost a deal or whatever. And I would say like, you know what, that's my team's fault. That's the product team's fault. That's our fault. So like we would take the bullet, we would take the blame. And it was basically like, regardless of whose fault it was, we would just take the blame. That's fine. It's a trust building thing, because when other people see you standing up and taking that bullet for them, then they feel like, all right, maybe this person isn't out to get me. They're on my side. Then it just builds that trust and you can work forward from there.
Yep.
And then just a follow-up question for you both. So, he's saying that, his supervisor says, oh, I'm here to help you, but I also feel like I have to babysit you. I mean, how do you utilize that person, right, when you're trying to navigate?
Yeah, I think, rather than going to your supervisor and being like, so-and-so is not doing this, it's more about hey, this is our, monthly one-on-one or our biweekly one-on-one. And I'd love to get some coaching from you on how to get, how to better influence people to do what I need to do. That's a completely different conversation than a very tactical, Tiffany's not doing this, Paul's not doing that, and which could create that sort of, okay, now I'm babysitting you and I'm literally trying to put out these individual fires. So I would tell them to like raise up and think about the whole, what we've been talking about, and ask for coaching related to that, and see how that goes, perhaps.
Yeah.
I would actually, this is Alika, I'd build on that. I'm big into masterminding, and I would do it slightly different. I would actually say, because masterminding is all about, here's what I've tried.
Yeah.
And so you again, because that shows that, you're already telling the person what you've tried and that it doesn't seem to be as effective as you want it to be. That way, then they could ask, back open-ended questions.
Yep.
Yeah, good point. I remember early in my career, my first role as product manager years ago, I had a really solid mentor. And I remember I went through something very similar to what the person who wrote this question was asking. I was basically whining, right? I'm not getting what I need and blah, blah, blah. And he said, Paul, I don't want to hear you talk about problems that you have. I want to hear you talk about solutions. So how are you going to solve it? And what do you need from me to solve it? And it just changed the conversation to one that was more action oriented. So whenever I showed up in that one-on-one, that Amy was talking about, I would say, in order to get my product healthy, in order to get it to where it needs to be from you, my manager, I need these 3 things.
Yeah.
And it just made it more action.
And if you put yourself in the manager's role, like I've led product teams, and what I expected was just what Paul said, come to me with a solution. And I would put it back on them and say, well, I don't know, how do you think you could approach this differently in the future? So it might help to also be thinking about their position and what they might be thinking in order to best approach it correctly.
Yeah. And I just wanted to touch, Paul had mentioned Art Petty's, level up power skills, which I think is fantastic. It's on-demand course, go at your own pace modules. And so I did find a coupon code for everyone who's with us today. So I just want to pop this in the chat. It's good through the end of October, but definitely check it out. So Allega's on the call with us, and she had a question about client willingness to pay. So I'm going to pass it off to her, Allega, if you want to come off mute.
Sure. So my question is, my role is kind of a product portfolio director. We actually have product leaders, but we had so many clinicians playing product management roles, the product leaders needed help to boost their teams. So we recently introduced some guidelines around client willingness to pay, right? I've taken, I think now 4 or 5 of the Pragmatic courses. And so we introduced, client willingness to pay, pervasiveness, and solving urgent business problems. And specifically, we did a deck around client willingness to pay. And we talked about, hey, if you've got an idea that you really need to validate this, either with some of our top clients and some friendlies, like, back to kind of the breakout of clients, it's clients, potentials, and evaluators. So I was on a call last week with one of our product lines, and they actually attended this willingness to pay kind of overview. And so they were telling me that they're standing up a new service offering. And this is for a consulting services arm, okay? So they said that they were standing up a new service. And so I said, oh, how did you back into, the pricing around client willingness to pay? What kind of activities have you done? So they told me, well, the way they approached it was they came up with $65,000. And they felt like they didn't do any kind of testing with friendlies. And you don't ask friendlies exactly what you're going to pay, but what is the value, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to give them some additional guidance, but I thought, well, let me kind of come to this Pragmatic and ask, because where I was going to go with them is to say, okay, that's a good start, yet if you had to write down a list of your distinctive competencies in this area or the value you're providing, is that actually more than 65,000 or is it less, right? You have to kind of like have done some analysis around, the value you're going to provide versus, I think it's worth about 65. Why, So just want to get your thoughts, like how to help this group maybe do some fine tuning.
And Allega, I know you joined a little late, but we have 2 of our Pragmatic instructors today. So we're
cool.
Well,
Yeah. So Paul or I, either one of us can answer that. We actually teach that exact thing in the price class. It would be hard to cover all of it right in here, obviously. But what I can tell you, and Paul, again, feel free to chime in, is so you're super close, first of all. What we talk about is, and you're absolutely right. You can't just go out to your market and say, Paul, what are you willing to pay? Because Paul's going to lowball me. It doesn't matter if it's a service, a piece of hardware, a piece of, software, whatever. People are going to lowball you, try to get it for free, or as low as possible. So what we talk about and what we teach is how it's really important to find a proxy to that willingness to pay. And the proxy that we use is impact. So we need to associate or figure out what is the impact of solving this problem in the market. If we offer a service, we're a consulting firm, we go into a company and we do customer interviews, we're meeting with people and we come back and we say, okay, we think we can, save your company $20 million or whatever that magic number is. Well, what is the value of saving that for them? What's the return on investment? And so we talk about figuring out what that impact is and extracting a value from that. And then going through, there's formulas in order to calculate that exact price, but it's all about assessing that impact and then coming up with how do they value that.
Oh, okay. Clarifying question on that.
Yep.
So I actually took the price class.
Okay.
And the client willingness to pay formula they have is if you know the competitor pricing. So that formula really wouldn't work. And I put that in the pack already, like that's not a formula well that has any kind of staying power as a practical use. I don't know for who it would, because oftentimes you don't have a competitive pricing. And this is a new service that I don't even know if if somebody's offering something similar.
Yeah,
so what
sure.
would you take that?
So if in that case, if it's a will-I type product or a will-I type decision, there's no competitive offerings. It's a new service. Yours might be the only one. We would want you to try to focus on economic value. So is there any way for you to calculate the ROI? There was a product that I was responsible for in my career where it was a service, so it wasn't anything tangible. It was an employee benefit program that we sold to other businesses. And the idea was it would reduce absenteeism and it would increase their workforce's productivity. So what we ended up having to do was figure out, what is their average salary? And if somebody misses work, what does that ultimately cost the business? For example, an attorney, they're billable by the hour. So if an attorney can't show up and work for a day, what does that cost the law firm? And so we were able to come up with an ROI calculation, and then that's what we use to present back to our customers we were trying to sell to, right? We think that the ROI for you is $200,000 a year, whatever. And then in price class, as you know, if you took it, what we teach is that you can take about 10% of that economic value. The reason for that being, if there's no other competitives, it's a new service to the market. The buyer is taking on a majority of the risk. Therefore, we can't actually account for too much more in value than that. Sometimes you can get up to 12 to 15%, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. And then that's how you would calculate your price. So if you solve a problem that's worth $100,000 in the market, 10% of that is 10,000, right? So that's what we would charge for that.
This is awesome. Thank you. I needed that little get over this hump. Thank you.
Absolutely.
What I found is different instructors teach the price class differently. And I've gotten more from pricing on these Friday calls than the class I took, because the instructor, it was his last day and it showed major time as far as what the participants got. So thank you. I needed
welcome.
that.
Yep, you're welcome.
Great. Thank you, Aleka, for your engagement and participation. We always love to see you here. So, and just for everybody else, feel free to, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. You can send them to me, you can send them to the group. But in the meantime, Amy, let's move on. So this one's about win-loss. This comes from Jenny. Jenny says, I'm a product line manager and I'm trying to implement a win-loss program. We're a smaller company that offers raw materials for different industries and sell direct and through distribution. Should I be doing win-loss analysis with our distributors accounts? And if so, what are some recommendations for how to go about this?
Okay. So the short answer is yes. And I think Paul might have some experience with win-loss for distributors too. So I'll let him chime in a minute, but definitely yes. And I'm going to answer this kind of in two parts. So the first thing is, I think it's really important to do some interviews and some analysis on our actual distributors themselves. Like, how are they doing, right? So let's say I just got done training a company that happens to be in the space of manufacturing farmer machinery equipment. So they build tractors and all sorts of cool stuff. So they actually sell through distributors. They manufacture the actual tractor or the blades or the lawn mowers, whatever it is. And then they sell through dealers who then sell the tractors, obviously. So I think it's a good idea to make sure that you're actually doing some analysis on your resellers, your distributors, you're comparing sales across them. the successful ones that have higher sales, what are they doing that maybe the other ones aren't doing? So there's kind of that level of analysis too. And then sometimes we make the mistake of assuming our distributors are doing win-loss in terms of why the customer is buying or not buying from them. And so we don't engage in that. So we need to find out, or maybe your distributors are doing win-loss. If so, that's great. Can they share the data with you? If they're not, how can you either get them to do win-loss directly and share the data, or how can you conduct win-loss, or maybe both, with the end customer? And obviously there's various ways to do that. It really depends on obviously how things are being sold. You know, if your resellers or distributors are selling through online, is there a way to capture before somebody leaves that online experience? You know, did they have something in their shopping cart and then they decided to remove it from the shopping cart? Why did that happen? So there's various ways to go about that. Paul, what would you add to that?
I would add, I think that was good, that really good overview of how to think about it. The way that I would hold the concept in my head if you had distributors is that there's actually 3 levels of win-loss analysis that you have to think about. One is you're going to do win-loss analysis on your direct buyers, those that don't go through the distributor, right?
Yeah.
Usually larger companies, they have a direct relationship with you. Why are they choosing you? Why are they not? That's level 1. Level 2 is you're going to do win-loss analysis on your distributors' buyers. So again, why are they making decisions to go with the distributor or not? Like Amy said, the distributor might do some of that on their own, but in my experience, most distributors and partners are not trained on how to do win-loss analysis. And so we're gonna have a conversation about how to get access to their customers. We can talk about that in a moment. But the third level, and the one that most people don't think about, is you're gonna have to do win-loss analysis on the distributors themselves. So like if one of your distributor partners decides to, in Amy's example, change brands, and maybe they were repping, John Deere, and now they've decided they're going to shut that down and go over to Husqvarna. Like, why? That could have a huge implication, right? If our channel partner are deciding to not sell our product anymore and go over to the competitor. So those are 3 different levels of win-loss that all need to occur. And they all might result in different learnings, but they're all equally important. The most challenging of those 3 is getting access to the customer of the distributor, because they're going to feel like that's their relationship that they own. And so many of them, their first reaction to an ask to access their customers for win-loss is going to be to put up the shield, put up the barrier. And so we have to get them to drop the shield a little bit. Most important way is to reference that, hey, this is a partnership. Doing win-loss analysis is not, to provide a report card on you, the distributor. It's really to understand how our collective buyers buy, so that we can construct the right product, the right marketing material, the right promotional activities, and so on, to help arm you to sell more. Because there might be reasons why they're losing deals that have nothing to do with them as a distributor. They might have everything to do with the fact that, we're not providing the right digital marketing or content marketing, or we're not putting the right keywords into Google, or we're not doing whatever. So until we understand that, we can't take corrective action. We can't do things to their benefit. So usually when they understand that, an executive to executive level discussion from us to the distributor, the channel will open up and they'll give us the access, but that's the first conversation we need to have.
I would add one more thing to that too, to Paul's example. It could have nothing to do with the distributor. So think about you as the company. What if it does have to do with the distributor and it's affecting the success of your end product? We need to know about that. That obviously that impacts us. So we have to do win-loss, as Paul said, or research throughout the entire chain. We have to know what's happening at each level.
Great. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful, Jenny. And I love that we have this 2-for-1 going on today. This is
I'm totally taking advantage of the fact that Paul's here.
So Amy, let's talk a little bit about market segments. This next one comes from Severin, who asks, if you're looking to explore which market segments to really target more aggressively, how much should you weigh market research, your non-customers, against your customer research? What are your thoughts on that?
All right, hold on. Let me make sure I understand the problem or the question. So they're looking to get into a new market. Is that what it said?
Yeah, so you're looking to explore which market segments to really target more aggressively. How much weigh your market research versus your customer research?
So I guess I'd be curious. So they're only doing research with their current customers. I mean, Pragmatic teaches that it is incredibly important and critical to have a balanced approach in your research efforts. So those of you who've come through course or through class, you know that we talk about this concept of the noisy 20%. We would never, ever want you to ignore the noisy 20%. But so we absolutely want to listen to that. And that can come from our current customer base a lot. But it's really important that we find the quiet 80, the people who aren't in our ear. They're not banging down our door, dying to tell us what we should and should not do. So we have to be really conscious of that, first of all. So I would say within your own customer base, make sure that you're addressing sort of the noisy 20 and the quiet 80. And then we are big fans and proponents of making sure that you're doing research with evaluators and people who are potentials in the market. Because that, I mean, maybe they're a potential for one segment and not another, but definitely want to have a balanced approach and not just be researching your current customer base. I don't know, there's a couple more questions I would probably want to ask that person in order to answer it more thoughtfully, but that's where I'd go right now. Paul, I don't know, maybe do you have anything to add?
Yeah, but I got to share something. So hopefully this shows up.
All
All
right.
right.
The pie chart. Yep.
Yeah, there we go. So the pie chart, right? If you've ever been to one of our Pragmatic sessions, you've seen this. We use this pie chart to illustrate a market segment. But here's the issue. The way that we define market segment is different than how most organizations define market segment. Usually when people talk about, I'm exploring a new market segment, they're saying, I'm in small business today and I'm looking to grow to large enterprise. Or I'm in Europe today and I want to expand to North America. Or I'm in healthcare today and I want to get into pharmaceutical, whatever. They think about it as like geography or industry or whatever. And we don't think of market segment in that way at all. We define a market segment as a group that shares a common problem. So problem is the tie that will bind them together into a market segment, regardless of size, industry, or whatever. And so the question was, how much should we rely on research from our existing customers versus new customers if we're exploring a new market segment? And the answer is a lot. But the catch is your existing customers, what is an existing customer for a problem you're solving today could potentially also be a potential customer for a problem you're solving tomorrow in a new market segment that you're not currently in. So I want you to envision a second pie chart that represents a different set of problems that you could potentially be solving. Sometimes a customer can live in more than one market segment at the same time because they have different problems. In fact, that's really common. And so usually when people say, well, like, how do I balance my research between customer, evaluator, and potential? The answer that I would give them is that the customer of one product or one problem that you're solving is the potential for another. And so the single easiest way to balance that research is just to look within your existing customer base of your current products and say, what other problems do they have? Because a customer for a product today could be a potential for a product tomorrow, for a different product.
Yep.
Hope
And just to tie that out, there was a piece in that question about like, which markets should we go after more aggressively? Well, which market segments, if you look at the problems that each of those segments solve, which one demonstrate higher urgency, more pervasiveness, higher willingness to pay? And then, those things that we teach in class should help sort of provide direction for which ones you would want to target more.
Yeah, fantastic. And I want to kind of skip a few questions here, only because we were talking about that noisy 20. And here's one from Kellyanne who talks about this. So she says, we're looking at spending some money and resources towards conducting some surveys for my software company. My question is, will I be just getting the feedback of the noisy 20 when I do this? I feel like it's usually dissatisfied ones who take the time to fill these out. Any other way to grab responses from the silent 80?
Yeah, man, if there was a magic way to ensure you weren't always getting the noisy 20, that'd be awesome. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge something she said. It is common, unfortunately, for the people who are super duper unhappy to be the ones to fill out the survey, or the ones who are really, really, really happy. So definitely that is true. We want to keep that in mind. And that's why it's really critical that your sample size or who it is that you're surveying, that you've got a really good, mix in there. So you're not just talking about your current customers, you're surveying sort of a broad group for that. There are ways that you can get lists. Maybe we need to go through a third party research firm that can help us conduct the survey to make sure that the people we're surveying really do have that mix that I'm talking about. It's certainly tough though. It's always a risk. Sometimes incentives come up in class. Sometimes we get into this discussion about, is it okay to incentivize? Is it not okay to incentivize? Some people feel pretty firm that the more you incentivize, the better, results you get. I don't know. I personally think we should try to do it without incentives, because when we use incentives, we get people who are filling out the survey just because they want whatever it is we're offering it. And then it can sometimes skew the data. The larger the sample size, the better off you'll be though in the end. So I don't know, that one's tough.
Well, what are some other examples? I mean, we talk about, surveys aren't the only way to gather feedback. What are some other suggestions that you guys have for a way to sort of capture what customers are thinking?
Like to validate?
Yeah.
So let's say you've gone out, you've done some level of discovery in your market, right? The whole point of discovery, or the main point, is to learn what you don't already know. You're going to go out there and cover new problems, smaller sample size, qualitative in nature. Then once we have a hypothesis, once we've formulated an assumption, once we see a pattern, a trend, now we're going to go validate that. Survey is a fantastic way to validate. We can hit a lot of people with the survey. They tend to be inexpensive, but we also talk about other ways. So you could validate stuff through experiments like A/B testing. There's all sorts of different experiments that you can conduct to do that. Some people use, prototypes, MVPs, minimal viable products, as a way to validate stuff. So we cover a lot of that in class, but there's certainly a list of ways that you can do that outside of a survey. Just remember that when you're validating something, it should include a larger sample size, and it's we're going to quantify that data. It's not qualitative anymore.
Great.
Product usage. Oh, sorry, Kelly. I just thought of one more.
Please.
Like product usage monitoring tools. Not everybody has the ability to do that, but if you have the budget, you can purchase a third-party tool that you can implement and integrate in your product that can capture what the users are doing, and then we can use that as a way to validate something as well.
Some of those are even free, like Google Analytics.
Good point.
If you've got a SaaS-based tool, you can implement that. It's free.
Yep.
Now, obviously, you're sharing your data with them, so you're still paying for it, but it's you can get a lot of data from that.
Yeah, excellent point.
And then specific to survey, 2 other things you can do to weed out the quiet 80%. The noisy 20%. You'll never completely get rid of them, but again, noisy 20% is not bad. They're not bad. They're just noisy. So we just got to remember that, we don't want to discount what they have to say. We just have to get the other quiet 80. But how do you get the quiet 80? So one way to do it in survey is to put a strong screener on the front of the survey to sort of screen out those that are undesirable in your sample set. So for example, if I was trying to weed out noisy 20%, I might put a screener question on the very front of my survey asking, how many times have you called into support over the last 3 months? And if the answer is more than 5, then I might say, that's a noisy 20%er, right? They're out, right? I'm just going to say, thank you so much for your time. You're done, right? And if they have an answer less than 5, then I'll let them through.
Yeah.
Amy talked about incentives. One other way to kind of make sure that the quiet 80% is a little bit more represented is to not over survey your population. Good rule of thumb whenever you're doing market research survey is you only send 1 survey per contact per year. That sounds like not very much, right? And it's not. So this doesn't mean you can only survey once a year. But what it means is that if you survey somebody every single week or every single month, especially if you're asking them to fill out a multi-page survey, they just stop responding unless they're noisy. And so quiet 80% tends to respond a lot better if we limit ourselves and how often we reach out to them. One way to kind of balance the two, you want to send a survey every month, but you only want to survey people once a year. Let's say you have 1,200 customers. divide them into 12 equal size cohorts. So you have like a January cohort of 100, you have a February cohort and so on. And then you only survey that cohort once per year. And then you won't circle back to them for another year. And that way you have a fresh sample every month in this case, but you're still not running over people too often. All right, just another technique you could use.
One more
Yeah.
thing to add on what Paul just talked about. There's this concept of, you can call it whatever you want, but sometimes some of us instructors talk about it in class, like this concept of a traffic cop. Because it can, if you work for a large organization and you've got a huge customer base and you are constantly doing a lot of market research, it can be a little overwhelming. So if you have this person or this, small team of people who's put in this position of really managing all those things that are happening, what survey is going out? Who did we survey? When was the last time we surveyed them? And sort of helping the organization consolidate and kind of, make sure we're not duplicating efforts, stepping on each other's toes. That can be a really good way to prevent this oversaturation and to lean on this team to help you figure out which cohort should we be doing now. Not everybody has the luxury, especially obviously if you're operating with limited resources, but if you can implement this idea of, a traffic cop to help you sort of manage all those research efforts, that can be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kelly Ann, that was more than a handful of techniques and suggestions. So I think that's fantastic. We're about to hit our time, so I just wanted to make sure to pop it into the, if anyone has any last questions, be sure to pop those in. We're happy to make sure that we get to them. But in the meantime, shall we take one more, Amy?
Sure.
Okay. So this one comes from Sherry. She says, I'm a product manager at an app company, and recently there has been a product marketing manager role that's opening up. She wants it. She worries because her PM team is very close, and she feels like her supervisor will look at it as a betrayal if she goes for it. How can she best navigate the situation, especially knowing that they'll still be working together?
Ooh, so I had a similar experience, actually. I used to manage development teams. So I was in charge of the engineers and the, business analysts and project managers. And then I got asked to step out of that team and move into product. And I was actually very concerned that my development team would think that I was being a traitor. I'm going to go to the dark side, right? But here's what I did. I was like, no, think about it. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to be your counterpart. Like, I know, I trust you. We still get to work together, first of all. And I know your world. I have your perspective now. And so when I move into this new position, I'm going to keep that in mind. And this is going to be amazing, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, first of all, if you want it and you want it bad, go for it, right? At the end of the day, you got to look out for yourself. Second of all, this is actually to their advantage because you live their world. Hopefully you have a good relationship with them. I assume you do. If this is something that you care about, you're sensitive to it. And so position it as, what are the benefits? If you now move into a product marketing manager role, what's going to be the benefit to the product management team? And so talk about it that way. Yeah.
Callie, what was the name of the person who asked this question?
This one is Sherry, Paul, Sherry M.
Sherry M. All right. So I think Amy did a good job illustrating how to tell the story from like, what's the benefit going to be to the rest of the team? And I think that is important. So I'll be the selfish one and I'll say like, what's the benefit to you? And I'll give you some insight, a conversation that one of my really strong mentors had with me early on in my career. He said, Paul, make no mistake, you don't work for whatever company we worked for at the time. You work for the Young Corporation, right? My last name is Young. And you always have to remember that, job number one is, to make the Young Corporation successful. And so how do you do that? And so Sherry, you work for the Sherry Corporation. And so you've got to figure out like, how is the Sherry Corporation going to be successful over the long term? If this is a career move that will make, the Sherry Corporation succeed over the long term, then yeah, like Amy said, you go for it. And that is whether it's at the same company you're at now or at a different company. Yep. Because nobody will take ownership of your career other than you. And you've got to really own that, and you've got to do whatever it takes to make you successful. If the company that you work for could find someone with your skill set to do your job at half the price, what do you think they would do? Right? They would go find them. And so you've got to take that ownership to increase your responsibility, to increase your compensation, whatever it is. and always think about you're in charge of your own career. That's a good thing. So look at it that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's really inspiring, and hopefully it gives her the courage to go for it, right? So that's great. Well, I wanted to thank you everybody. Amy, it's so wonderful always being able to pick your brain. And Paul, what a treat. It was so great that you got to pop in and give us some extra insight. So, we certainly appreciate that. And, to everybody, we love having you. We do these every week. They're informal discussions with a different pragmatic instructor. We want you to come late. We want you to leave early. We want you to just definitely pop in. Let's talk product. And as always, we appreciate your participation. So until then, have a great weekend, and thank you